Andrew, Boris, and Blair. Three individuals that all have a few significant things in common. All of them we could identify as members of a British power establishment elite. Each of them have spent their careers and lives selling the public a bill of goods which is based upon lies and fabrications, and laughed about it behind the public's back. But recently, all three have also run into some significant problems in that some of their wrongdoing is now being publicly exposed. I'm Stuart Hooper, a lecturer in political science and PhD researcher with a particular focus on this idea of establishment elites within societies. And I come at these sorts of political problems not with a left versus right lens or a liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican, Labour versus Conservative Party, but instead a position that tries to look at right versus wrong. And I believe if we break ourselves free of these essentially sort of prisons of thought and prisons for our mind, which put us into these camps of left versus right, if we break out of that, we can start to instead look significantly and critically at the real power structures within a given society. And yes, even societies which claim to be liberal democracies. So let's take a look at these three members of this British power elite that we could definitely identify and explain what they all kind of have in common, the direction that their stories are currently going in, which is not really good for any of them, except maybe one. And then we also need to think about a solution to this problem. If we live in a society that is, at least to some degree, controlled and directed by an elite group of people for an elite group of people, and not most people that actually exist within a society, well, we need to do something about that, and we need to think of a solution to that, and I'm going to offer a couple of those in this video. So let's look at these three men in terms of how they publicly present themselves as what they should be versus these now new revelations of what they actually are. Prince Andrew is perhaps the highest flying of these three particular individuals because, of course, he comes from supposedly royal roots, often festooned himself in the garb of a military man, wearing all sorts of extravagant uniforms, many medals strapped to his chest, and tried to present himself as this defender of the nation, this defender of Britain. Now, if we look a little bit more critically into that, well, he was in the military, and yes, he did serve, but he was a pilot in the military. A pilot is perhaps the most prestigious job that anyone could actually have in the military, and we can certainly be sure that Andrew was far away from any reality of what warfare actually looks like. That, of course, is left to the lower working classes of society who are expected to put their children in the firing line. Certainly not royals that find themselves facing bullets whizzing past their heads. That aside, let's look at the current problem that Andrew faces. This is, of course, finding himself tied into one of the most significant stains on the Western establishment elites in recent memory, and that, of course, is the Epstein saga. Now, we are going to have to see how all of that ends up playing out and whether or not he is found to be guilty of any particular wrongdoing. But ultimately, we could come to the conclusion that even the accusation of these crimes, even the linkage of a person of this supposed royal stature to this sort of problem is really kind of antithetical to this public presentation, right? This does a whole lot of good for shattering those rose-tinted glasses that most people look through when they look at the royal family. and what it actually stands for and what it actually does. Let's shift on to Boris Johnson, of course, current, perhaps not for much longer, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Always sort of presents himself as this happy-go-lucky patriot politician, someone that really stands for everything that Britain is about, and is himself very much like everyone else within the country. Well, what's currently happened? Well, we find that his government has been sending out party invitations, which said things like, "Bring your own booze." Meanwhile, the country, of course, was in a police state, could not attend funerals, could not see loved ones in nursing homes or hospitals, had their businesses shut down, couldn't see friends, families, girlfriends, boyfriends, any of this. But we see that the happy-go-lucky patriot and the individual who proclaimed on many occasions, "We're all in this together," well, tends to not really be the case. And then finally, Tony Blair, long-time Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and of course responsible for leading the country into the conflicts in both Afghanistan and Iraq as part of the war on terror. Now, that was, of course, all framed in this patriotic, liberal light of we're bringing democracy and freedom and peace, and we're going to get those weapons of mass destruction, and we're going to find those terrorists. Well, in actual fact, did any of that end up really happening? Not so much, especially on the WND side of things, and tended to also have a significant negative consequence, in that these actions were responsible for, in Iraq at least, the death of over 1 million people. Now, Tony Blair has kind of gone on this strange career path since his time out of office, where he's established things like the Tony Blair Institute, where he has been able to push this position of what can only really be described as a globalist policy position around the world to many different countries and many different leaders, and try to send them down a similar road as what he and his counterparts have taken in the Western world. And recently, as some of you know who have watched my previous videos, he has now been put up for a knighthood. Yes, the Queen has selected Tony Blair to receive the highest honour of the land and become Sir Tony. The problem here is that now we have over 1 million people that have signed a petition calling for an end to this, saying that this knighthood is an affront to everything that Tony Blair did while in office, and especially an affront to those 1 million plus people killed in Iraq. Now, where should we go with this analysis and this understanding? Well, I would say that we need to look to C. Wright Mills, one of the most famous sociologists, political scientists of his age. He wrote a book called The Power Elite, and he has a bit of an explanation for us that can explain why these people get into these positions of power and why ultimately they find themselves in trouble. Mills posited that prestige is the shadow of money and power, and that these sorts of political, economic, and military elites, quote, strive to make their names notable, their actions acceptable, their policies popular. And this is absolutely what all of these three individuals have tried to do over the course of their lives in the different ways that they've tried to do it. And when they are successful in this process, well, quote, members of the power elite are celebrated because of the positions they occupy and the decisions they command. So when we have these people that make these big time decisions for us, we tend to look up to them and we respect them. We celebrate them to some degree. But of course, the question is, who are they really making those decisions for? Who is really receiving a benefit from the outcome of those decisions? Is it most people, or is it just members of this particular elite? But when these leaders run into problems, as we've just analyzed, well then we, as the people, have an opportunity to withdraw our consent from these leaders. We can refuse to follow people that call themselves royalty. We can refuse to follow political leaders which claim to be doing one thing while they are clearly doing something else. And the best way that you can refuse is by you yourself becoming a leader. So be sure to keep an eye on those sorts of situations. And if you found this video helpful or useful in any way, I'm really trying to grow and build this channel here on YouTube, trying to get into a schedule of uploads. So I really need as much interaction from you guys as possible. So please like these videos. Leave me a comment, share them wherever you possibly can, and hopefully we can start to build somewhat of a community here, which, as I've mentioned multiple times, is not concerned with left versus right, but right versus wrong, and actually identifying where the real power structures in society really are and what we can do to question them.